Welcome to Broadcast to Post, the podcast where the Key Code Media team dives into innovations shaping the future of broadcast, creative, and AV industries. And today, we're joined by two trailblazers in our industry. First, Renard T. Jenkins, the outgoing SMPTE President, whose illustrious career includes leadership roles at Warner Brothers, TV One, PBS, and Turner Broadcasting. Renard is currently the President and CEO of I2A2 Technologies, where he continues to revolutionize creative technology solutions across media, healthcare, and education. And Rich Welsh, incoming SMPTE President and Senior Vice President of Innovation at Deluxe, plus Chairman at VoluStore. Rich's groundbreaking work spans companies like Dolby, Technicolor, and Sundog Media Toolkit, where he's advanced everything from HDR to 3D and cloud pipelines. Today, we'll explore the current state of SMPTE standards like HDR and ST2110, plus emerging technologies like virtual production and USD, and we'll answer your burning questions in the live Q&A. This is Broadcast to Post. Let's get started. Why don't we start with some of the basics? Let's talk about what exactly a SMPTE standard is for the uninitiated.
Yeah, Rich, you're the incoming president. That one's yours.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. Hopefully I should know. So SMPTE is best known as a standards development organization, and it lives in an ecosystem of other standards organizations who we work with, and also within the industry. We're the place that people come when they want to develop standards to help them with things like interoperability and compatibility. And SMPTE's history actually has been standards from the very beginning. Our first standard was 35mm film. Before that, there was no standardized speed or film gauge. And so CF Jenkins, our founder, standardized film and then realized that actually there was more to be done in the motion picture space. So he founded SMPTE, and that then became SMPTE when television was invented around a decade later. And, from there, we've been really at the center of media technology standards for over 100 years, which is incredible to think about. If we skip forward to today, the process of making standards, is much more streamlined. But also we recognize that we don't need, for instance, a full-blown standard for certain kind of practices that we want to kind of normalize in the industry and make sure everyone's doing the same thing, but not absolutely require people to do in the way a standard does with certain technology stacks. So outside of standards, we also have what are known as RDDs, registered disclosure documents, and anyone can publish one of those. And they're effectively saying, look, we have a working practice, and this is what that looks like, and we want to use SMPTE as the conduit to get that out to the community. We also have engineering guidelines, recommended practices, and then full standards, the STs, and each standard has a number. And we can go more into the process, but effectively where we are as an organization now is that we publish full-blown standards, and this is something that a manufacturer or a software developer could go away. They will know that their product is able to interoperate with other products that also follow the same standard. And that's absolutely the cornerstone of this, the ability for the ecosystem to work together on an engineering level. And that's what SMPTE is all about. We're trying to make life easier for everybody who makes wonderful TV shows, news, live sports, movies, adverts, and everything else going on in the ecosystem of media, but also, with high quality. And we've come to expect that really high quality output. And that's what these engineering efforts in standards go towards.
I find that immensely interesting because a lot of people who are on the forefront of technology will talk about how there's a new SMPTE standard, but little do a lot of people know that there's been months or even years prior to that to ideate to come up with that concept before it becomes a standard. Can you briefly walk us through the process of how something goes from a concept to actually being approved as a SMPTE standard?
Sure. Typically, we'll have a group come to us. This might be, for instance, content owners like the film studios, or it might be a group of individuals who are all trying to solve the same problem. So once we get to the point of agreeing to do a standard, we'll then look at whether that standard should fit within an existing family or suite of standards in a particular area, say digital cinema or video over IP, or whether it needs its own new set of documents and a new family effectively. So if we think like XR as a good example, augmented reality, virtual reality, that's definitely going to be its own suite. It's not, it may share some commonality with other suites of standards, but there would really be, a good case for something like that it's worth having its own group of standards. And at that point, then we'll set up a new ST standards committee. It gets a number, and then we go through the process of developing that standard. And that can be quite quick if the foundation's already there, or it can take longer if it's something where we're building a whole suite of standards. Typically, that can take a long time, although the individual standards themselves don't take as long. And so we're trying to get now into a much more rapid publishing cycle where we develop the standards quickly in an agile software development type of manner. So using things like GitHub and HTML documents. And we want to basically make that process a lot faster. I think people kind of associate SMPTE with being a little bit slow and in developing the standards, not without reason. If you're going to make something that's absolutely watertight from an engineering point of view, you absolutely can't rush it. But if you have all the components that you need in place, you shouldn't have to spend a long time developing a standard that really has all the foundations and the component parts there. So we absolutely support the rapid development of standards. And whereas they used to take years, they now for certain take months. And then bearing in mind that those standards will live quite a long life, they'll go on beyond the initial publication phase. We have to then maintain that. So there'll be changes in technology. I mean, a really easy one to think about is security. Internet security suites, encryption suites change. And we have to update standards to reflect that if there is a weakness in the same as any other industry, and companies and individuals have to update their security. If that security is embedded in a standard, we would have to update that standard. So there's a whole maintenance life cycle that goes on. And also other standards like organizations pick up SMPTE standards and effectively adopt them. So ISO is a good example of that. A lot of the media technology standards that ISO publish originated as SMPTE standards.
So the wonderful thing about standards is that everyone has them. And that means the folks have standards that fall outside of kind of the SMPTE construct, right? We look at things that are very ubiquitous to our industry, like ProRes by Apple, or NDI by, now VizRT. So how does SMPTE reconcile those standards that are developed outside of the SMPTE scope versus what's being done within SMPTE?
Yeah, I think, Rich hit on a number of things. And the main way that we do that is by partnering across the industry with other organizations. We spend a lot of time building those partnerships, working with other organizations, and making sure that we understand what the needs are of the industry. By doing that, we can find ways in which a lot of these other open source, some of them are open source and some of them are not, but some of these other standards that are being created can be integrated into the larger interoperable workflow. So when you think about the fact that our industry has just, inputs coming from all over the place, having a place like SMPTE where we can actually bring all of that together to have a conversation about how do we actually make all of this work properly and how can we make it work in a sustainable manner. Those are the things where we really do dive in. And so we have those conversations. We work with other organizations. We look at their standards. They look at ours. We see where we can actually place some of them together. I mean, VSF and 2110 and, an NMOS from AmLaw, all of these types of things work together as a suite. So all of the hard work of those other organizations and the hard work of the individuals within SMPTE play together in order to make that work.
So 5 or 6 years ago, a 2030 vision paper was released by the folks over at Movie Labs, which is a nonprofit organization with members of technology from the 5 big studios. And Movie Labs was the vision paper was an ambitious look to the future. Here's where the puck is going to be in 2030, and how the filmmaking will be done in 2030. And as I said, it was very ambitious. So what is the relationship with some of SMPTE's standards and the various other ways SMPTE contributes to standards with Movie Labs, which had a much more robust goal?
Yeah, I would simply say that first, full disclosure, I was a member of the Movie Labs board, and the way that we work with Movie Labs today is that one, we have their CTO, Jim Hellman, is a member of our board of governors, and we work very closely with Movie Labs in order to see how standards can be integrated into the processes and the workflows that they're describing as the future of movie and media production. We work closely with them across the board within the standards process, as well as in various conferences and things throughout the year. We also have working groups within SMPTE right now that have members of Movie Labs as a part of those working groups. And they also have a voice at the table as we are developing these things. My job as past president is really about partnerships and about supporting Rich as he comes into his position and supporting his vision going forward. Movie Labs is part of that vision. And so that's how we support them. And a lot of the things that they're talking about in 2030 tie into things like video over IP, virtual production, enhanced and, next generation audio. All of these types of things, along with HDR and all these other types of things, are a part of giving customers the most impactful presentation of the work that the artists have put together. And that's where SMPTE and Movie Labs really focus in on the art and science of what it is that we do in the background.
I like that you mentioned that because there's a lot of similarities between art and creativity and technology. There's an idea, it's formulated, it's crafted, but then it's put out to the world, and then you see what sticks, see if people appreciate it, see if people use it. And so I'd be curious to hear what standards has SMPTE approved and put out there over the past several years that just has taken off and people can't get enough of.
Oh, the big one. You know the big one, Rich.
Well, 2110. Yeah, I mean, this, there's a revolution going on in live, in television, and video over IP obviously is a huge change for not only the manufacturers, but the broadcasters themselves. What surprises me about 2110 is where it's being adopted in places maybe we didn't originally think of when we first started work on that standard. The one that stands out to me that I love and I can't recommend enough as an experience for people to go and try is the Las Vegas Sphere. That incredible venue with its unbelievable immersive screen on the inside, and of course the huge screen on the outside as well. The two largest screens in the world, one's on the inside and one's on the outside. They both work because of 2110. That's an amazing venue, an amazing experience. But at the end of the day, it's an artist's vision, be that the live music, artists that perform there, or the filmmakers who are producing content for that venue. And that absolutely relies on perfect video sync across that huge display surface. And likewise for the outside, that's a huge marketing vehicle. And again, that has to work like perfectly. It can't be glitchy or panels out of sync with each other or any of that kind of thing. And 2110 is the only standard that they could find that would actually do the job for what they needed to deliver in that venue. And I think that's a great kind of testament first to the work that went into that standard, but also to the kind of outside of the box thinking of how to use it. And I know, Renard, that's just the tip of the iceberg in places that 2110 is being used.
Yeah, Rich, one of the things that I really like about 2110 is that it was an industry effort. VSF and AMWA and SMPTE all played a big part in bringing 2110 to where it is today. And they continue to work together on, advancing it forward. What I love is when you're riding the tram and you're in Las Vegas and you pass by the Sphere in the morning, there's a giant smiley face that actually says good morning to you. That's 2110 in its most simple example of how it can work. There's also a lot of work that's going on right now and a lot of development that's happening for virtual production. And they are finding ways to use 2110 that were, once again, like Rich said, they were not things that we were thinking of at the time when all of this was being put together. And then you start looking at live sports. Live sports is just using it just everywhere. And one of the greatest examples that I've seen right now, one of the best, has been the folks at TV Globo in Brazil. They are killing it with 2110, and they are killing it using 8K, and their live sports innovation and development is just moving at a really rapid pace. There's a ton of innovation going on down there. I'm very impressed by how they're using it. I want to see where 2110 goes in 2025, because 2024 was sort of like not really a coming out party, but it was sort of like all of a sudden people realized its power. So now that they've realized its power and its ability to be malleable, and working in some of these legacy facilities without having to sort of just cut off what you're doing. You're building while you're moving. And 2110 allows you to be able to do that. One of the things that I laugh about is that those of us who started, and worked in the live event area, we got tired of carrying all that copper around with us. When you went to a stadium or you went to a facility that was not pre-wired, I can literally tell people I used to dig ditches on golf courses in order to run cable. That was the way that it worked. Now you don't have to do that. You have the ability to do a lot of this stuff over IP, and that just makes life a whole lot easier.
So there's also some other standards which are even more recent than 2110. Talk to me a little bit about microservices and XR and AR and how those standards are resonating out in the wild.
Yeah, with microservices, we were actually involved with microservices probably about 7 years ago. We started doing some work with a few organizations that were looking at how those modular blocks could be a part of a different way of looking at the media supply chain. So broadcasters were more so looking at it, and then the film industry said, hey, wait, these microservice sort of modular way of looking at production pipeline, as well as looking at media supply chain, can come together. And so, and both of these, both industries feed off of each other, and they always have. And that's what's really great about it. Microservices in themselves, for those who are not aware, it is you think about it as a simple but closed, small process that can actually be replicated and moved into other workflows. So this is when you start thinking about our workflows as more of a sort of a Lego and a building block type of way, instead of thinking it in a linear fashion, which was, an older way of thinking about workflows, like, probably pre-1999. Things were very linear. Now with the sort of integration of microservices, we are able to do things at a much more dynamic way and a much more dynamic scale. So if you have, say, you're using your ESB to kind of pipe down into your workflow, you can have a microservice that is simply saying, I am going to create an output specifically for a specific streamer. And then you can have another one that would go for another streamer, because they all have different requirements. That helps you to be able to have one input and multiple outputs. That kind of change in the distribution platforms now makes it much more palatable for people who are working in hybrid situations or working in legacy areas to be able to integrate these types of things. And that's one of those things that SMPTE continues to work very hard on. when it comes to XR and VR, we're just starting those conversations with the individuals who are actually working on standards in those spaces. We do have some working groups that we are talking about starting in 2025, and I do look forward to seeing where that goes, because I see that technology as the next step in storytelling.
If we flip the script on 2110, it's had enormous popularity, but have there been any standards that have been worked on and have been put out there and just haven't resonated? Or are there standards that there are just some fundamental roadblocks that we haven't overcome yet to make it viable for folks?
I mean, certainly don't want to throw anyone under any buses, but you can look at some of the lessons we've learned from standards developed that maybe had unintended consequences. And I think a really good example of that is MXF. As that came in, we were working on that alongside lots of other groups, actually. MXF was by far probably the biggest industry effort at the time. Obviously, that was in order for broadcasters, primarily for broadcasters, to transition from tape-based workflows to file-based workflows and facilitate that. And I think one of the key points of it, and the X in MXF, is extensible. And yeah, it's extensible to the point that there's like 1,000 versions of MXF. So in efforts to make it open and flexible to the user's needs, we also moved away from what you would traditionally think of as a standards constraints. And the reason that standards are constrained typically is to allow product manufacturers and integrators and broadcasters and studios to be able to actually adopt the technology and know that when they plug cable into box and box into other box via cable, they talk to each other, be that over IP or further back, obviously things like SDI and so on. But the point is that without the standards, that just wouldn't happen. That it would be the Wild West. MXF was interesting because, like I said, in an effort to be kind of more software kind of oriented and make it very extensible, we ended up with a lack of interoperability. Spinning to another standard where maybe adoption isn't as wide as it could be. IMF is a good example. We've done loads of work. IMF is used widely by studios for archiving, and certainly is used a lot for interchange in the post-production space, and particularly in the theatrical cinema or theatrical releasing and cinema space. IMF is very popular. But, that hasn't maybe seen as much adoption as we would like, but it's a slow burn with that. And again, I think this comes down to a lot of things are not always adopted as quickly as you think they might be. And cloud is a good example. We're still, certainly on the broadcast side, we're still a long way to go with the kind of full adoption of cloud as the kind of primary infrastructure for live. And there are lots of good technical reasons why that hasn't happened yet, but it's in progress. And things like that, absolutely. Other standards effectively hinge off adoption of technologies. So, if we were more cloud-based, and cloud production workflows are pretty common now in the filmmaking space. And, a lot of the movies that I work on directly, we're almost 100% cloud, and we try not to get out of the cloud if we can, because, it's much better if you stay there. But as the technology matures and the industry matures and the workflows mature, we'll see those standards get picked up. But certainly we've learned our lesson from standards that maybe haven't been adopted as much as we would like. And, I guess you have to. If you don't break things, you don't really learn anything.
Yeah. And what I like about what you said, Rich, is that, we can look at these standards that even though they may not have gotten the adoption that we were expecting at the time that they were conceived, they're still playing a major part in how we are actually getting things done and the workflows that are being built around it. You talk about how, we're doing so much of this work in the cloud with in the film community. When I was at Warner, one of the things that we were focused on was dailies in the cloud, because that process in itself was a very manual process, and not only a manual process, but it was very physical process. And being able to get that into the cloud took the use of IMF and being able to understand how we could actually do that. So there's sort of the desire at the beginning of the conversations about where something can be developed and where it could go. And then there's the reality of what you actually run into once you put it into the wild. And I think both IMF and MXF have both just benefited our industry tremendously thus far. And they still have room to be further developed and further to go.
Now, we touched a little bit on this earlier, which is how SMPTE worked with different groups and how SMPTE is embracing working with open source and GitHub, et cetera. But there's been a big push outside of SMPTE for things like OTIO, right? The Open Timeline Initiative, and also Open Review and Approve. And that all then plays again to the modularity within the vision paper for 2030. So has there been a lot of work with these groups that are developing this kind of open source standards in conjunction with SMPTE?
Not as much as I would like. Over the past 2 years, we have spun up a working group that is focused on open source, but we need to get more involved and we need to get more people at the table in order for us to make sure that we're doing things that are going to be interoperable across the industry. The one thing that you always have to be careful of with any of the standards that are being put out there is that you're thinking globally. When you're doing this work, you sort of get, sort of the engineering dilemma where you can paint yourself into a corner because it's a good idea and you're working on a specific task to fix a specific problem. And that's great. And yes, you fix that problem, but in the, sort of in the development process, you may have created, 3 other opportunities. And we have to think about when you're looking across at open source, when you're looking at all of these things, how do we make sure that not only are they, truly open source and they are benefiting the entire industry, but are they also, scalable? Is it something that we can actually put out into the wild and it can actually work for a larger community? Those are things that SMPTE looks at because we think globally. We are a global organization and we don't just think, about what's going on in North America. Rich is our first president from the UK. And I think that is a step forward. I am the first president of African descent for this organization. And my view was to look, why don't we have more, more activity in Africa, in South America, to be honest, in places, like Brazil, where you have a SMPTE chapter and you have these wonderfully innovative people, but why aren't we doing more? Why aren't we hearing more? That same thought process plays into open source. How do we make sure that the community that we're building understands that not only do they have a seat at this table, but they have a voice in how we're actually developing all of these things? That's the key to us making sure that as we go forward, there's not this sort of, standards versus open source, because to be honest, that's ridiculous. They're all meant to help the industry. So how do we come together and make sure that we're all talking and sharing ideas and making sure that what we're working on is interoperable, scalable, and it's for the long haul?
That sounds like something that dovetails directly into Rich as the incoming president, what your vision is to continue to carry that torch. And how do you see, or can you tell us what your vision is and how that's going to impact media creation for the next decade or even longer?
Wow. Well, I mean, I really hope that what I do at SMPTE over the next couple of years as president impact the media industry for a decade in a good way, obviously. That would be a great legacy. But, I think from my point of view, to expand really on what Renard said, and this is something Renard and I have been working on together for before Renard was president, actually, and something we absolutely see eye to eye on. We need to become a more diverse organization, and that in every respect, not only the kind of the demographics of our members, but also the industry areas that we cut across. We very much sort of stayed in that engineering lane, typically broadcast, some cinema. But if you look at the amount of media consumption now and the areas that happens, everywhere from mobile to XR and, headset, experiences to these, new kind of developments in out of home experiences and these huge venues like the Sphere. And that's, it's not the only immersive experience that's sort of coming forward now. We're seeing these kind of immersive sports fan experiences that are, not at the live venue, but give you a kind of a feel of being there. So there's so many areas, so many industries that we actually touch already, and SMPTE standards are in use, and people probably don't realize. I'd love to do this kind of experiment where we just whipped out all the SMPTE standards, because I tell you now, media would just stop dead. Like everybody's video, everybody's audio, all media would just not really work without the SMPTE standards that underpin that, not only the playback, but the production of all of that content. And so, what I want to see is that we can get out to a much wider audience, explaining what we do, explaining why it's important, but also to bring them in and have them help us develop these things. I think that my biggest, hope for SMPTE is that in doing that, in bringing in, much younger constituents from much more diverse backgrounds in terms of, not only, the areas of the industry they're in, but globally, different geographies, and getting all those people together, working together to really push things forward, we're going to have a better result. We're going to have more innovation in workflows and system design and content tools that help the creatives deliver their vision. At the end of the day, we're in the service of the content that people consume. And so be that news, which is so important now that we have a kind of consistency and veracity of this content, that we know that what we're seeing is real. We live in an AI age, like it or not, and it's very easy now to be misled. And so what is truth? How do we make sure that we have integrity in our media? So all of these things, I think, can only really happen if we come together as a community and work together towards these common goals. So my vision for SMPTE over the next couple of years is for us to expand our reach, get a broader membership and a broader community into SMPTE, so that we can carry these things forward and make the technology better, actually for everyone across the world, and for the good of, I hate to say, sound overly grandiose, but for the good of mankind. Because actually, we're so now tied to media. Everything is on demand. We see news events as they happen in real time. And content now, when movies come out, they come out in so many different formats all at the same time. It's not so long ago that you actually had to wait for film prints to stop playing in America before they could move to international, so people could see the latest blockbuster release in that country. And now everything's instant. And in that kind of world, and with the influence of things like AI, and as we move to more deep experiences from things like immersive, I think it's essential that we have groups that look at all of that and make sure we do it responsibly and with integrity and maintain quality.
And thank you, Rich. You know what? Thank you so much for pointing out the immense power that media and communications have, and how important it is for us to think about that ethically and responsibly. That goes beyond standards. And thank you, Rich, for really honing in and making that a part of your mission as we go into 2025.
Let's stop now before I have to get the tissue.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, this has been a pleasure having both Renard, the outgoing president, and Rich, the incoming SMPTE president, to hear both sides and to hear both the technical and some of the political portions has been phenomenal. It's been very educational. Everyone watching the podcast, check these two gentlemen out on LinkedIn. They're there. And again, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And stick around for some live Q&A. Thank you so much for sticking with us during this podcast. We've been able to get Rich on the line with us to answer questions that you have during the last half hour or so. And during that, there's been a ton of questions coming in on all the different social media platforms, including some folks out there texting me, which thank you. I appreciate that. So, Rich, let's start with one of the first questions that came in. And this comes from Tom K. Will 2110 incorporate HDCP?
Okay, I don't think so. I would have to confirm that, but the HDCP, firstly, is a consumer content protection standard, so that's designed for consumer interfaces, HDMI. So I don't imagine we'd be implementing that in 2110. Plus, actually, in live workflows and broadcast workflows, encryption within a facility is pretty unusual, if not, in fact, not used, because it's extremely high possibility of fail, and that's not the kind of thing you want in a live broadcast environment. So you don't deliberately introduce fail points in what's considered to already be a secure environment. So the security around 2110 really is around IP security, and that's part of the beauty of it. You can have your firewalls and keep your or air gaps as well. But the second reason as well is, as far as I'm aware, HTTP's cracked. The master key was reverse engineered, so it's actually breakable by pirates anyway. So I don't think you would implement a standard you already know to be broken in that sense from a security perspective. But so I guess the answer is no, but I'm not on that committee, so I can't say for sure.
Excellent. I'm glad to see we have so many, as a coworker of mine calls us, propeller heads in the room in the various social media platforms, because we're getting all these technical, really granular questions. So, Rich, I'm going to hit you up with another one. This one concerns RD 2964. They'd love to hear about the importance of IPMX and vendors needing to support that workflow.
Okay, well, I mean, I do know that we are looking at IPMX generally, because obviously it's very well supported in AV, particularly around live events and so on. So that is something that's being investigated. But this is a good opportunity to say that I am not on every standards committee and every standards group. Even if this was my full-time job, which it isn't, but even if it was, I wouldn't even be able to attend all the meetings that SMPTE has globally. Across standards, education, and membership. I was just on an education meeting just before this, actually. So I do try to get into them as much as possible. But I will say, if you're very, very deep into the nitty gritty of some of the standards, I may not be able to answer the question, because in my position, I don't get into those anymore. It's actually how I started in SMPTE, though, was on a standards group. We developed the frame rate standards for digital cinema. So that was my first introduction to SMPTE. And I would say this: if you are really interested in finding out what's in the SMPTE standards, of course, become a member, and then all standards access is free. But secondly, get involved in the standards work. That's the best thing to do. It's actually a great way to get involved with SMPTE. And plus, if there are certain things that people want in standards, IPMX is a good example, because it does come up frequently. But I would encourage people to get involved with SMPTE, become a member, get involved with the standards groups, and help us develop these standards. If enough people in the community want these things, then absolutely we will develop those standards. That's kind of how it works.
That dovetails fantastically into a question that David has. Uh, uh, can you talk a little bit about what the benefits are of being a SMPTE member? You mentioned the access to all the standards and all the technical white papers, but what else is there in terms of a benefit of becoming a SMPTE member?
Yeah, so as you said, we've got the standards access, and the you can then elevate to become part of the standards community, where you're actively working on the standards. Then, of course, there's the publication. So you get the SMPTE Journal, which is a peer review journal, which we publish, I think, 8 editions a year, if I'm right. And and that's an absolutely amazing technical publication, actually award-winning. We won some awards for that last year. And it's jam-packed with the latest and really dives into the fine detail of the various topics that we cover in each journal. So each one's themed, and then we dive in on those topics. A lot of the journal articles are also then presented at our annual conference, which brings me on to another benefit, which is that you get reduced rates to go to things like the Media Technology Summit in Los Angeles, which is coming up in October. And that's an absolutely amazing meeting of minds. It's the place to go for engineering expertise and networking, and of course the presentations, many of which again get published then in the journal. And that also brings networking into it. The membership is an incredible group of people. We're growing. We are broadening our membership to a much more diverse audience, and we are. The events that I attend, the membership meetings, are just so amazing. Not only the content, and each meeting usually has some sort of theme and a presentation or maybe a facility tour. In fact, next week I'm going on a tour of Sky Television in the UK with students. And then afterwards there are presentations from recent graduates for the students, but also for the rest of the membership in the UK. And that's in Sky Cinema. I mean, what an amazing event to go to, and the ability to go and look around Sky, and then meet not only the new talent in the industry, but the next gen, the students who are going to be graduating in the next few years, who are effectively giving us our pipeline of engineers. I mean, that's just one example of how membership really pays off. Turning up for those events, supporting new talent, but also getting to network with them, learn from them, and potentially develop your own talent pipeline for your business.
This next question is something that's near and dear to my heart because the times I've worked with SMPTE, this is the nut I've wanted to crack, which is what specific strategies does SMPTE have in place to engage and interact with younger and independent filmmakers? Also folks that are part of the creator community as opposed to the more traditional film and television and broadcast arenas.
Yeah, it's absolutely something that we're working on. We have been actively engaging filmmakers, albeit usually at the kind of the other end of the spectrum, not the early career filmmakers. But what we're doing actually is getting them more involved in our presentations at conference sessions. In fact, we were literally just in that meeting I was in just now, we were discussing how we can get some early career filmmakers into our next conference, which is at NAB, and it's the Future of Cinema Conference. We want to make sure that as well as the more mature filmmakers, and we've, SMPTE has had at its events people like George Lucas, Ang Lee, James Cameron. I mean, the list is pretty impressive. We have had presentations we actually had the first public presentation from the filmmakers from the Las Vegas Sphere 3 years ago at NAB. And so, we do actually engage the creative community. But again, at the moment, that it typically has been at the higher end, although we obviously attract an audience of young filmmakers keen to learn from the kind of the masters of the craft, as it were. But we absolutely are working to engage now much more with students and graduates who are doing that, on the more creative pathways. But also, as you said, the content creation community has exploded in the last decade. There's so much user-generated content. And it's become an incredibly important part of the experience for audiences all over the world. I know for me, for certain, it's a good proportion of the stuff I watch is by individual content creators. So yeah, this is something that we are looking to expand into, but it's a slow burn. You can't immediately address those. I mean, that's a much bigger community than, for instance, the Hollywood filmmaker community. So it's the outreach is a different shape, but it's something we're very, very actively trying to do and improve, because our technology is used just as much at that end of the spectrum as it is at the professional end. So yeah, we absolutely want to engage that audience.
You actually said during the podcast that if we think about it, without SMPTE standards, there would be no online video, right? Everything is fundamentally based on those standards.
That's right. And of course, there are a lot of standards in online video that aren't SMPTE or they're open source. And I'm not pretending for a moment that SMPTE, the whole suite of technology that you use to do online video, has SMPTE sitting behind it. But the fundamentals of video and audio for broadcast and for movies and online all come from the foundation of SMPTE standards. It's not that long ago. And I'm going to age myself now, but I remember when there wasn't an internet, and so even just like file-based workflows were a pretty radical thing when I was early in my career. So yeah, and then like internet video was like, right, when I first saw the internet, there was no video for sure, but it didn't take long, and actually now it's like the largest proportion of internet traffic is video. So yeah, absolutely. The technology is there, particularly as you move up through the kind of the professional world, you see it more and more. And I think one of the things that's interesting, actually, when you think about internet video and the creator community, is I think when the kids at home see their favorite influencers and so on creating videos and putting them up, someone who's new might well be doing that just off a mobile phone, right? Literally no other tech. But actually, even those creators are stepping up to like more professional microphones and editing software. Well, editing software has timecode. Timecode is a SMPTE standard. Color, like all the color standards for video are SMPTE standards. So they effectively we get to this point where as you're moving up through it, it's sort of not necessarily obvious to the audience, but these influencers are using professional technology. They're using professional cameras, professional editing equipment, professional sound equipment, and that's why they look so good. They may have started on a mobile phone for sure, and I'm not contesting that, but I guarantee Mr. Beast is not filming his latest Netflix show on iPhones. So yeah, it's interesting because it's kind of invisible, but it is there, and it is really fundamental to the experience that we have.
Someday you and I will sit down and we'll talk about how Mr. Beast is doing their production right now, because it's very interesting. Keycode was perhaps involved with some of their technology, and that's something we should discuss. It's very interesting. I also am kind of stand on my pulpit for a moment, and I would love to have a discussion with you at some point after about ways and strategies to reach the creator economy and kind of the younger generation. I think we can come up with something really special. There's another question that's come in, and that's I just lost it. Oh, is there a certification process for folks who want to get into SMPTE and want to learn the standards? Is there something, a course or certification that says, hey, you kind of know what you're talking about?
Yeah, we do actually have training courses with certification at the end in various areas. 2110 being a big one there, and that's an incredibly popular course. We have some courses that are free, and then we have some paid courses that have certification. So absolutely, but you don't require any certification to become a member. You can simply join and start learning from the community. So yeah, I wouldn't. I think if you're looking for certification, it's certainly something we have. We have, as I said, some free training, and some paid training with certification. So yeah, absolutely get involved if that's what you're looking for. But also if you're just curious and you just want to get engaged with the with the engineering community and media technology, then absolutely join SMPTE. There are no requirements other than your membership fee, of course.
We're going to swing the pendulum back to a tech question. I don't know this. Maybe you do. How does Blackmagic's implementation of 2110 differ? So I'm going on the assumption that the 2110 standard that SMPTE has accepted may be slightly different than Blackmagic's.
Well, I mean, yeah, I can't intelligently answer that. Unless there's a Blackmagic person here ready to.
We've got a
give me
lot of manufacturers on the call right now, so there may
okay.
be.
Well, I mean, look, no, I can't really speak to that. I don't know. I've definitely not in the weeds that deep that I could tell you the answer to that. But what I will say is, we've seen this over the years that standards as stringent as we make them can be open to interpretation, and that does quite often lead to little differences between manufacturers. But I think what you tend to see is that the big stuff just works. It's all plug and play. And it's usually just like, I've seen this before for instance, digital cinema. We have an ongoing challenge with one particular flag. And one manufacturer sets it one way, another one sets it another way. Some servers read it, some servers don't read it. Some content providers do it in their QA check, other ones ignore it. So there's always this kind of, you'll get down to that level at some point. And that's kind of natural with technical standards of any kind. But as long as when you plug that wire in, it works, I think we've done our job.
There's another question regarding the SMPTE website. And is there a plan to streamline the website and member portal for easier navigation, especially when searching for documents on a particular topic, such as D-Cinema?
Yes, is the quick answer. That is a work in progress. Particularly, yeah, we're aware that particularly at the moment, the document search is not as slick as it could be. So yes, we're actively working on improving that. Yeah, again, that's one of our kind of staff tasks. We have a working staff. Well, they're spread all over the world actually, but they're headquartered in New York. So yeah, operational stuff like that happens primarily out of our New York office. Yeah, and I know they're working very hard to improve that and also the standards access.
So as we discussed during the podcast record, 2110 has blown up. It's been something that a ton of manufacturers are using, and people want to see it in action. And one of the questions from our friends over at AJA will there be a 2110 demo area at NAB 2025?
SMPTE is not setting anything up specifically. I mean, we have a stand which is more really about membership. But there are going to be 2110 product demos everywhere. AJA, I would imagine, being one of them. So I think you'll be able to see 2110 in action all over the show floor. And as I mentioned in the podcast episode, that of course, go over to the Sphere and see it absolutely. Kind of nailing it with what it does in that space with the display system. It's incredible.
I think we should close out this segment with a great comment we just got from Ian McSpadden at AZPM. He writes, I joined SMPTE 15 years ago. I highly recommend it on both an industry, insight, and education opportunity and networking within the M&E industry. So that's got to be a feather in SMPTE's cap.
That's great. Thank you, Ian. That's a glowing recommendation. Can't articulate it better than that. That's straight from a member. So thank you.
And thank you, Rich. Thank you for joining us on the podcast and joining us for Q&A today. Thanks to everyone who tuned in, and thanks so much the Key Code team that made this possible. We look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. Check us out on the socials, like and subscribe, obviously, to our YouTube channel, and we'll see you on the next podcast.
Thank you. Bye-bye.